input is all of a sudden limited to 140 characters. And the other reviews on this page are the size of War and Peace. War and Peace is bigger than the server reference manual for Oracle. It's a big book. We have existing data problems again. I'm going to go to a web page, and I'm going to see a review that's this long, and somebody's going to limit me to a review that's this big. How do you explain that to people? What about an implied restriction that wasn't even specified here? We want to limit the length of a review in our application to just 140 characters. There's an implied restriction that comes along with this. They want to use text messaging. Text messaging has an industry standard. It has a very small character set, and it's not a character set that anyone's currently using in their database. There is no database character set that is SMS. And this character set doesn't support every single character. It supports a lot. It doesn't support them all. And it uses an encoding scheme that is not consistent with any of the database encoding schemes. So there's a problem with the end user being able to type in stuff that can't be sent in a text message. Those are all of the issues with this simple little requirement. All of a sudden you can sit down and see how this small, tiny change that somebody says, oh, this will just take 30 seconds and we'll do it, would have all kinds of ramifications and implications later on. Everything, no matter how small, needs to be designed, needs to be thought about, needs to be specified out. In the article that was writing about this, they wrote, this is why, as a user interface designer, you need a good understanding of what it takes to implement a feature before you just nod your head and write another bullet point, another requirement. You need to be thinking about all of these implied restrictions. I read this article, and it was very good, but they missed a lot of things, because it was written by a user interface designer. All of the text in blue, all of the stuff about the database, they didn't even think about that. They came up with a lot of user interface issues, but they didn't come up with any of the data issues. The point here is people writing the applications really need to be working with the people who manage the data, and the smallest change at the user interface layer will have an impact many times on the data layer, and vice versa. There needs to be a great deal of coordination between those two teams. Here was another example. There's a guy, Joel Stavosky. He writes about software frequently. He was working on an application where he wanted to change the way something worked. He was going to do a file import command. Now, in this application, they could import from one of two places, either on a disk from a file or from a URL somewhere on the internet. So they wanted to be able to do a standard file open or a prompt to get a URL. And he wrote out the specification, and it was pretty simple. Page 1, ask the user, do you want to import from disk or the web? Page 2, if you're a disk, well then I put up the Windows wizard to get a file in, the file open dialog. If you're getting it from the internet, from the web, I'm going to put up a different dialog with a little text input box. But I need to branch here. Now, Joel sat down with the Windows API, the documentation, and he started to try and figure out how he could fit in a Windows standard file open dialog box in the wizard that he wanted to build in his application. And he found out that you could, but it would be very difficult. It would be hard. What a lot of developers would do at this point, what I would say most developers would do at this point, is sit down and start writing that very hard code. Why? Because somebody gave them a requirement. They said, here is the specification. You go generate code that satisfies this specification. Joel, since he was sitting there and he wrote the specification and he was going to write the code, said, you know what? Instead of writing really hard code, what I'll do is I'll change the requirement. And I'll do it in such a way that I don't have to integrate this file open dialog with the wizard. I'll change the specification. And what I'll do is instead of having page 1, and so he goes into this in the article, instead of having page 1 that splits off into page 2 in 2 different directions, I'll just make page 1 a menu item. One of the menu items will go down one path. The other menu item will go down another path. I won't do a wizard. I'll change the requirement. That, in many cases, is the best way to do something. Not to implement what is in the specification just because somebody wrote it down, but to go back and question the specification and say, we could do that. It's going to cost this much money to do it that way. We can achieve the same result and do it with something that costs this much money, a significantly smaller amount. So this is something I tell people all the time. When you're asking questions, how to do something, don't ask how to physically implement something in a very specific way. Rather ask, how do I achieve this goal? How do I get to this endpoint? Most of the questions I get on AskTom are asking questions about all of the little points in between where you are now and your end goal. How do I do X? How do I do Y? How do I do Z? What you should be asking is, I have this problem. I need to open a file from the web or the internet. What is the best way, given my application architecture, to implement this? So rather than asking the question, how do I get the file open dialog integrated in my wizard, ask the question, how do I do this file open from the web or file open from disk? What's the best approach for that? So rather than asking for all of those little intermediate points, go straight to, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. How would I best achieve this given my circumstances? Another thing I see done wrong, done incorrectly frequently is not knowing how to ask for help. So this was somebody writing on the internet. And they said, I'm responding to questions on a forum, and I'm out there, and I saw this question that said, is there an API, application program interface, or a quick way to find out which window the mouse is in? Somebody replied back and said, yes, there is. The API doesn't do it directly, but there are a couple of calls. Here are 2 interesting calls that you could look at, think about using. One is get the cursor position. So it would tell me exactly where my cursor is, the mouse cursor. And then if I had the cursor position, I could make a call to another function, window from point. And that would tell me the current window that the mouse was over. And the person came back, and I get this all the time. Somebody asks me a question, I answer the question, and they come back and say, thank you for that answer. However, I have a completely different question. What I asked you the first time has nothing to do with what I really meant to ask you. What this person wanted to do was find the window that currently had focus. If I move my mouse out of this window, the get current position would be outside the window, and it would return a window other than the one that had focus currently. They wanted the window that had focus. But you can't tell this from the first question they asked. It's very, very vague. So when you're asking questions, be very specific. Give lots of information. I'm going to show a couple of screenshots of AskTom questions and answers. I'm sometimes known for my sarcasm, if you will, when I don't get a lot of detailed information. So somebody here is saying, in my database, I'm not able to extend this parameter. They give me some